Welcome back to the program. I'm joined now by U.S. Representative French Hill, Republican from Little Rock. Good to see you, sir.
Roby, good to be with you. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, it's nice to see you. So, COVID-19 ramping up again. You've been pretty vocal about advocating for vaccinations. Tell me why you are making that push necessarily. And I have to look at the demographics, and I see that Republican voters seem to have the most vaccine hesitancy. Is this why you're trying to lead on this?
Well, I'm trying to lead on it because I think it's a public health crisis. I mean, our hospitals are full. Our younger people are now getting COVID-19 in a serious way and being put in the hospital. And 99% of the people not vaccinated are the ones at risk. So I'm really encouraging all the citizens of Arkansas, consult with your physician. If you have questions about this, if you're pregnant, if you've had COVID-19 before, if you have some concerns about the vaccine and its impact, just talk to your doctor. But the way to really help reduce the public health crisis that we have is to get more people vaccinated.
Do we need to move to something more authoritarian? Do we need to mandate vaccines? Do we need to mandate some of this policy that you're advocating?
Well, I think fear is a good motivator here. When you see the hospitals full, when you see young people getting sick, when you see young people suffering the consequences. I hate to say that, but I think that's a major motivator. But you're also seeing some employers take some standards. If you're not vaccinated, you need to wear a mask at all times, trying to create a carrot and stick process around the workplace.
Let's turn our attention to inflation. It has been rising, to me, not unexpectedly. I think we could have anticipated that. What's to blame for this inflation rise in your estimation?
I think there's two big factors. One is there is serious supply chain disruption. There's no doubt about that, and we saw that particularly in lumber, building supplies, when mill workers were laid off and mills closed, and yet people do-it-yourself projects, home building didn't stop, interest rates were at zero, encouraging more people to buy houses. So that's an example, in my view, of a supply chain disruption. But when you see ordinary commodities across the board, milk, our fruits, our vegetables, many components, and when you talk to business people, to me, it's that fundamental issue of too many dollars chasing too few goods, and you cannot blame this mass inflation, the worst we've had in 20 years, on just supply chain. So that's why I've said my yellow warning light is on, that inflation is not transitory, that there's something bigger here. When you're proposing to spend $6 trillion and you're buying $120 billion a month in government securities by the Fed, those two things have produced a money supply growth that we have not seen in decades.
And so for some context here, though, we did keep prices artificially low during the COVID-19 pandemic. We also did do a lot to stimulate the economy even before COVID-19 hit. Is some of that to blame too, some of those policies?
Well, we didn't see any inflationary growth or even inkling of inflation. In fact, just the opposite. Jay Powell's testified many times for the past 20 years they can't even get inflation to grow, which is why I think he's too sanguine, too laid back about this issue. Because if we get inflation embedded in expectations, I think we're going to be in for a real punishment of America's working families who are going to have to pay the burden of those higher prices.
There's a split in the economist opinion realm there, world sphere, whatever you want to call it there, that they see this as very temporary, that it is going to fade back. And then there's others that are obviously sounding some larger warning signs. Which camp do you fall into?
I'm in the warning camp, and that's not a partisan issue. Larry Summers, former economic advisor to President Obama, Treasury Secretary for President Clinton, Jason Furman, President Obama economic advisor. I agree with their warning signs, as well as along with a lot of other economists across the country, that we're being too accommodative, and that's both on fiscal policy, as I say, and on monetary policy.
An infrastructure bill has come up, finally bubbled up to the surface here. You're against the one that is being pushed by the House Democratic leadership. You say it's partisan, it's not paid for. You supported a tax cut bill a few years ago that was partisan and not paid for as well. It racked up some $1 trillion worth of debt there. How much of this infrastructure debate is about finding a solution? How much of it is about it's a good wedge issue for Republicans to try to get 5 more seats and take control of the House?
No, I don't think so. First of all, let me push back on you. When you reformed the tax code, which was a Democratic priority for 25 years to lower the corporate tax rate and make it competitive, and make our competitive tax rates across the country more competitive for families. 9 out of 10 families in Arkansas benefited. I think you're looking at it in the wrong way. That economic policy reform has produced higher GDP, more taxes, more investment, more R&D, more jobs, and we had the best economy in 50 years. Turning to infrastructure, I did support the House Republican infrastructure bill. I voted yes on that. It was about $500 billion over 5 years. It was paid for, and it is a surface transportation bill. And I support a compromise that has a surface transportation impact and includes key issues on broadband, like we've been all, I think, working on so hard. And we saw the benefits of those broadband investments during the pandemic.
Do you think there can be a compromise bill worked out, hammered out between Republicans and Democrats? It never seems to happen. The majority, whether it's the Republicans in charge or the Democrats in charge, just seem to kind of keep their caucuses in line and steamroll. Is this an issue where you feel like there may be some folks willing to cross partisan borders?
Yeah, well, last summer we had a bipartisan bill, and Speaker Pelosi, to your point, pulled it from the floor and wouldn't consider it. She wanted to consider only a Democratic bill. Because those senators are so closely thinking about this in a bipartisan way, and it is a 50-50 Senate, I think that changes the dynamic some in this Congress, where there's a possibility for compromise. I felt bad for Joe Biden because he wanted to compromise and get a common sense infrastructure bill passed with Senate and Republicans in the Senate, Democrats and Republicans. And then Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi sort of threw that under the train, no pun intended, on trying to only do this big spending bill. So that's the controversy right now. Can the Democrats find the compromise to do bipartisan infrastructure and hold their caucuses together? So it'll play out here over the next few days.
Lastly, you've expressed some concerns about entrepreneurship and the lack of new business growth and startup growth, basically. What is your concern and what are you doing to address it?
Yeah, we've got a bipartisan group in both the House and Senate that are looking at barriers to entrepreneurship. We've asked the GAO to help us with a study to list the top issues from their point of view of why have we had fewer business startups. This is pre-pandemic, so our whole request of them is pre-pandemic. And why do we not have more success stories like we have here in Arkansas with the Venture Center and our venture ecosystem? And you and I have talked about business now for 20 years. And when I look at Fayetteville and even in Searcy and Conway and Little Rock, North Little Rock, I see a real venture ecosystem growing and I see a support for startup businesses. That inspired me to see, can we get that thing, that sort of approach going across the country? Our patron saint is Steve Case, founder of AOL, and his concept of rise of the rest. So we're looking for what are those federal or state barriers to startups.
All right, Congressman French Hill, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Roby. Good to be with you.
Back with more right after this.